Okay, so I see a couple people coming in. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes to sign on before we get started with No BS, the PG version, enterprise selling. PG? No one can say the actual words before, but these folks know a lot about enterprise selling. You're in for a treat today. Thanks for joining us on a Monday morning too, at least on the West. It's going to be a busy week for most of us. It's almost the end of the month, but we super appreciate it. So just want to ask our panelists a question so that you can get to know them a little bit better. What's something that not everybody knows about you? And let's start with, I think Sam said she had a good one, and then we can see if the guys can one up her after hers.
All right, good luck, gentlemen.
Not like we're competitive.
Not competitive at all.
Well, so I'm originally from Switzerland, and so what that means is that I grew up driving pretty aggressively. My mom was an unbelievably aggressive driver. She had a custom 911 when I was a kid, and that's what I learned to drive on. So the thing that you don't know about me is, to date, and I'll just note that I'm also 39 years old, I have 38 speeding tickets on my record. That's right, fellas. That's right.
And Gina.
Wait. How do you still have a driver's license?
Yeah, how is that legal?
How is that legally possible?
I'm also going to say that I've only had one in the past 10 years. You really have to think about from like 16 to about 29. That's a high concentration. Listen, I got a great start in negotiating, right? It started so that's mine.
I would say it was note to self, don't buy your kid a custom Porsche.
No. I just borrowed it here and
okay,
there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, no access to custom
borrow
Porsches.
The custom Porsche, yeah. Jeez Louise.
Wow. What about you?
What's yours, Doug?
Gosh, I have a lot of fun ones, but I think I'll lead with this. I've been on 5 reality TV shows.
What? Which ones would we know?
Yeah, name a couple.
Wow.
Just gonna have to figure it out yourself.
Okay, we'll Google you.
Oh my God, is it Celebrity
Rehab? It wasn't
Rehab?
The Bachelor. No, it wasn't The Bachelor.
Oh man.
One of the shows I won the whole thing, which is actually pretty cool.
No, you have to give us one. Come on.
What did you win?
So, all right. So the one that I won, it was actually on ESPN. They only did 2 seasons. And it was called Beg, Borrow, and Deal. And it was, it's basically a combination of Survivor and The Amazing Race. So they took 2 teams of 4 people. We didn't know each other. We had to race from South Beach, Florida to Mount Rushmore with nothing but the clothes on our back and our driver's license. And along the way, we had to complete a series of sports-oriented tasks, like find Lance Armstrong, find a bike, race him in a 1-mile race, and beat him. And you could, there were crazy rules. Like, you could never touch cash or a credit card. You had to sleep 6 hours in every 24. You only got 1 favor from a person, and that was it. So if I asked you, Richard, for a pen, and you had a car that you could drive us from Florida to wherever we were going next, and we got the pen from you, then we were done. You had no more favors. So we would have to get your roommate to give us the car to drive us in the car. It was crazy, and we won.
Congrats! That's amazing.
I love that. Now, Rich, what's yours?
Wow, I have. This is really stiff competition here. Most people don't know this about me. I've driven cross country 4 times. Once with a cat. The fastest I did it was in 3 days. And during that journey, we thought the cat got catnapped in Cheyenne, Wyoming. What? And it turns out the cat had just tucked itself underneath the bed in the hotel room. But yeah, driven cross country quite a few times. Not in a rush like Doug, though.
I don't know what's more impressive, the catnapping or the drive.
The drive was, there's a lot of nothing, and no offense to anybody who's in kind of the middle part of the United States. There's fields of corn that just go on forever.
Richard, we call those the flyover states.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No offense.
And we've alienated half of the MSP.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Weird. Attendance is dropping.
We did call this no BS and enterprise selling. So
no bullshit.
Right.
Yeah,
it's true.
We're going to call it like it is.
For everyone who's watching live, you can see that our speakers are extraordinary people. And so they're going to walk through an amazing discussion on enterprise selling today. My name is Gina Hawley. I'm the Community Marketing and Events Manager at Modern Salesperson. Pros. I'm going to be moderating today's awesome panel. And before I introduce our speakers, I'm just going to give you guys a little overview of MSP. If this is your first time joining an event, or if you're brand new to MSP, welcome. We put content like this out almost every single day. We have an amazing summit in a couple of weeks that you can join, so I really hope that you enjoy this. So MSP is the world's largest and most elevated peer learning community that's exclusively for leaders, so managers and above, in sales and revenue. We currently have it's really so amazing companies. You get to ask your tough sales questions and get them answered by your peers from these companies. We have events like this where you can interact with our top tier members. And once we get back to in-person events, we used to host them all over the country too. So stick around and we'll get back to that. ModernSalesHQ.com to learn more and sign up for one of our awesome events. So just a couple housekeeping notes about this live event. It is live. So if you go to the Q&A panel down below, you can ask these amazing people your pressing questions. They have some great stories for us and are a wealth of knowledge. If we don't get to them, we may reach out to you afterwards and answer them. So use the Q&A panel. These folks are really smart. Don't go easy on them. This event is also recorded, and we will be sending you the recording probably by tomorrow with a follow-up on key takeaways from our panelists without our amazing sponsor, SalesLoft. SalesLoft is an amazing company and partner to MSP. We're also hosting a founder fireside chat with their CEO in exactly 1 week. So I'll put the link in the chat box. I'll also send it in the follow-up. But now let's get to it. So it's time for our panel to introduce themselves. Let's start with Doug, growth partner at Emergence Capital. Who are you and how did you get to where you are today?
Oh gosh, we don't have enough time. We do not have enough time. That's for damn sure. Yeah, I think so hey everybody, Doug Landis here, growth partner here at Emergence Capital. I basically think the best way to put it is I'm a lifelong advocate, learner, and bag carrying member of the sales community. I started selling when I was just a little kid, whether that was, like in my newspaper route, and then worked my way up through where was I? Oracle, Salesforce, Box, Google, and now I jumped ship 3.5 years ago to join the dark side. We're an early stage B2B enterprise SaaS focused venture firm. We invest in A's and B's, just do enterprise SaaS. We were the first investors in Salesforce and Zoom and Box and Yammer and Steelbrick, you name it. And I have a fun role in that I'm basically like free go-to-market consulting for all of our portfolio companies, SalesLoft actually being one of them. Kyle's a great friend of mine, so you should join that conversation next week. He's a very prolific communicator. But what's up? This is gonna be fun.
Awesome. And Sam?
Hey guys, so I'm Sam McKenna, founder of #Sam Sales Consulting. Much like Doug, I've been selling since basically I could walk, everything from babysitting to raising money to whatever I could do to build a business. I've been in enterprise sales, I guess, for about 13 years now. So was formerly with companies called like On24 that you know about, and then LinkedIn most recently before starting this. #Sam Sales, where that comes from for the company name. About 5 years ago, I started posting on LinkedIn all kinds of sales tips and tricks, and it just got a lot of following and a lot of engagement. So if you're looking for some true sales tips day in and day out, great spot to go and check them out and see if you
got
can
a lot of great
learn
ones.
Yeah,
got a lot of great ones. I'm not gonna lie.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Sam. And last but not least, Richard.
Richard Scrow, general manager at Modern Sales Pros, longtime panelist moderator, I think second time panelist. But before I was at MSP, I have about a decade of experience in enterprise sales, primarily in solutions engineering. I've always worked on very, very complex, technically challenging products. In my last role, I was a VP of sales at a company called mParticle. Ended up running that sales organization for about 24 months before joining the team here at Modern Sales. But always been in kind of early stage company enterprise sales for about the past decade, and really excited to be joined by Sam and Doug. They're two of the best in the business. So really excited for today's conversation.
Yeah,
you know what's consistent amongst the three of us? We're all a bunch of hustlers.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about the no BS in enterprise selling, like truthfully, you got to be a hustler, right? You got to be thoughtful and creative, and like, don't take no for an answer. I'm just thinking of like our backgrounds. I'm like, oh yeah,
I did see a registration question that said, are you born with it or is it taught? And maybe you guys can get into that later.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because people talk about like introverts versus extroverts, like who's better at selling. It's like, I hate getting into those discussions.
Yeah, you don't want to take that quiz that tells you if you're a good salesperson.
Yeah.
Okay, but so what is enterprise selling and how do you get great at it? With the longer sales process and more people involved in the buying journey, what does it take to make a 7-figure deal? So the topics we're going to be going through today are enterprise sales first principles. Our speakers will go through what enterprise sales means to them. We'll be going through setting up your team for success, and then touch on hiring, planning, and project management. So everything you need to know in this big umbrella. But let's start with Richard. So what is your definition of enterprise sales first principles? What does it mean to you?
I think that's a great question, Gina. And I think one of the things that you hear throughout today's session is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all model for this. Sorry, Doug, to steal
That's
your
one.
thunder. That's it. How
Take a shot.
But one of the things, when I think about enterprise sales, I do think that it is typically identified as a more complex sales motion. It means that you're not selling to one person. There's a number of folks or number of buying groups that are involved. That's the first part. The second piece is there is an elongated procurement, security, and otherwise process. You're not swiping a credit card to buy something. And the last piece of it, it typically coincides with either larger companies that are on the purchasing side or a larger contract value. So in my past life, we did this based on it was the number of people that were in your organization combined with the industry that you're in. So certain industries, we would just say that's our enterprise, our strategic team is going to go after those. But it wasn't a hard and fast, if you're this and that, then you're definitely enterprise. It was a deliberate decision we made as a go-to-market team.
Yeah, clearly the one commonality there is there's a complexity to enterprise selling. Which I fully agree with. I think some other things to consider, because in the world of, because we invest in early stage companies, and most often these early stage companies start off selling kind of smaller, high transactional kind of deals, and they move up market, commonly described as we're moving them from commercial sales up into enterprise sales. And maybe there's a mid-market tier in there in between. So we look at it, so there's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice it, which basically you got to think about it. Is it based on, revenue of the company? Is it based on number of employees? Is it based on dollar value of what you're actually selling? Like anything over $25,000 is considered enterprise. So it's largely kind of dependent upon you and what you're selling and your customers or your target customers, right, if you will. That's going to help you kind of define the line in the sand. And I say in the sand because over the course of your lifetime, it's going to shift. All of a sudden you went from, just having one sales organization. Now you've got 2, maybe 3, then 4. And you're gonna constantly be tweaking that line based on whatever makes the most sense. But I think a couple things to consider is just recognize the fact. I look at it this: there's like 5 selling motions in the world of sales, right? There's the product-led sales, if you will, and that's typically deal sizes less than 100K, high volume relationships, or maybe individual contributors. Then there's kind of persona-based level selling, which is, we'll call it the dollar values like 200K below, 5-month sales cycles. Relationships are kind of at the director level and below. And then you move up to value selling. That's now we're talking, maybe we're in the 500K and below, 7-month sales cycles, selling to VPs. And then you move up to vertical based selling. Now you're selling to SVPs, right? So maybe you're talking 9-month sales cycles. You're going to get probably about $1 million deals and below. And then lastly is what I call executive selling, right? And so that's where you're selling to the C-suite, big effing deals. You're talking like, the multi-million-dollar deals, at least 12-month sales cycles. You need to have the C-suite relationships. So think about that. Like, what are we selling? What's the motion? What's the dollar amount? Also, you also have to be really mindful of like, what is your product ready for, right? So do your product capabilities only support to the value selling level? And if so, okay, then what do you need to build to actually move up market? So just think about that as well.
I think you said the perfect thing too, like the what's your product ready for? And I would think about this from your perspective too, of as a leader to your sales team, or specifically for any ICs that joined on the call and are thinking about how do I make the move to enterprise, you have to think about, is that person ready for enterprise as well? And one of the things I talk about all the time is in sales, you have 100,000 different levers that you can pull all day, every day to make a deal happen, right? And that talk about us being hustlers. This is how you do enterprise sales, is you hustle and you constantly think, what next, what next, what next? What else can I do to keep the conversation going, keep communications going? How do I stay on this person's radar? How do I break down more doors? How do I multi-thread? How do I do all these things, and how do I do them well? An enterprise salesperson, right, to chase enterprise deals, you cannot be the person that says, okay, I had the meeting, I had the discovery call, I had the demo, now what do I do? You have to be the person who's like, I did 70 things in between all those steps. What else should I be doing, right? Like all that stuff has to come innately, or you have to learn it from other people.
One of the things that is important, because somebody asked the question, how do you transition from like low touch sales to high touch and moving up market? So it's super important to split. It's almost like you have two different sales organizations, right? And largely you may have 3 different sales organizations. You'll have your high velocity one, your mid-market one, and then your enterprise one. Now, largely you can talk about your process in mid-market and enterprise is going to be a little closer than the high velocity one. But honestly, hire 2 different sales leaders, create 2 different sales processes, make it literally distinguish it inside your CRM that these are different processes, because the steps involved in doing bigger deals with more complexity, with more people involved, as Richard said in the beginning, there's different levels of procurement, IT, legal, et cetera, that you literally have to treat it as almost a completely separate sales organization underneath the umbrella of the sales leader. So just first of all, be mindful of that. Right? Like set it up as almost different organizations, different leaders and different processes.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things too that we found that I think a lot of folks, as they try to make that push up market, is they don't realize that things like forecast meetings are different. You don't have an infinite number of shots that you can take at some of these big brands. And advice I actually got from an early Salesforce person was your enterprise forecast meeting is now more about how paranoid are you. Tell me why the deal won't close. And Sam, if you come to the forecast meeting without a reason why that deal won't close, you're not pushing hard enough and you're not thinking laterally. Back to Sam's point of there's the 7-step process and then there's 492 things to do in between each one of those. What's the 493rd? Yeah. Why won't this deal close? And then what are we doing to get ahead of that? Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people mess up.
Totally. And I think to Doug's point too, I think thinking about the way that your process is set up for enterprise sales, again, it really has to be different, right? From your low transactional deals to enterprise, your KPIs also have to be different. So you've got to think about that it's also you celebrating a lot of really little wins, right?
Totally.
Like, we got an SVP to show up on the call for 15 minutes, right? Like,
right.
Oh my God.
Or you just found out who they were, right? Like, oh, shit. I spent 2 months trying to find out who this person was, and now I know.
I made a reference to Dumb and Dumber the other day with Harry saying, Lloyd saying, she actually talked to me, man. Like that, those are the little wins, right, that we get in enterprise sales. Like we're chasing those things too, right? It's not just had meeting again.
Yeah. So this question has now come up a few times, which is now that we're in this work from home environment, and look, Dave Rudnitsky, one of the greatest sales leaders of all time in the world of enterprise. He was at Salesforce for a long time. Now he's at Yext. He's got this playbook for how to do enterprise sales, and one of these golden rules is get your face in the place. Like get a badge in the office. Well, guess what? We can't really do that right now. So what's changed? Well, not a whole lot. I mean, you're still doing all of the same things as far as trying to identify the map and the landscape of who's who in the zoo, who's got power, who's involved in all of their buying decisions, when do they make buying decisions. So you're still trying to figure all that out. You're still trying to figure out the business's financial case for change. Do not forget that. Write this down. What is their financial case for change? And the financial case for change is going to be driven by one of three things. They're either focused on growth, driving revenue, focused on cutting costs, or focused on mitigating risk. And that's it. And that's going to be their driver. And it comes from the board, and then it trickles all the way down. And so when you know that, then you can start to map and align. Well, if they're focused on growth right now because they happen to be, taking advantage of this COVID situation, well, awesome. How do we align? How does our solution align with that? And then who is involved and who cares about this most specifically in the organization? Because there's still a ton that you can do without actually having to get your face in their place that you need to be doing in the world of enterprise.
I'm gonna go on record and say that there were probably nothing better that you guys learn, if this is a new thing for you, than what Doug just said in this entire hour that we spend together. That is not just enterprise selling, that's sales 101. Totally. Why you're monetizing the pain of whatever challenge you're solving. And I cannot tell you, probably 95% of reps don't know how to do that. We're not getting to the right levels. We're not asking the right questions, right? We're not understanding why would you even do this and what is the cost of inaction. What happens if you don't make this change, if you don't solve this challenge, right? What does that look like? I think that's such a phenomenal point. So want to note that. On the work from home thing and what's changing, what are touch points, our levers, right, that we could have pulled before, they're still here, right? Even though we can't get the face-to-face, I think the things that's changed is that we can no longer put our heads in the sand about doing things that we should have been doing all along. Frankly, one of the things that we should have been doing, and many of us have been doing for the last 10 years, is digitally selling, right? So how are you connecting with your buyers on social media? What content are you posting? How are you educating them? How are you looping them into the conversation? Do you have I always go back to if this, then that for everything in sales. Do you have a process of if I have a meeting, then that, then I connect with them on LinkedIn? Especially if you're selling into large enterprise organizations, especially if you have a crack in the door that's open and you're trying to expand your network in there. Easiest thing you can do is start to engage with all those people on LinkedIn, post meaningful content, and get your name on their minds all day long. So it's one easy work from home change you can make to stay engaged.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's talk about multi-threading. Richard, what are your thoughts on multi-threading?
Oh, multi-threading. It's one of my favorites. So multi-threading is one of the key parts when you think about that complexity in enterprise sales, right? In addition to, it's not just one rep selling to one person. There's typically a team of people, right? AE has a sales engineer with them or a solution consultant or somebody technical. Maybe there's an executive level champion. When we think about at least how we used to run our forecast meeting, we knew there were 5 major groups that you needed to be involved with in the conversation. And if you didn't have, and you hadn't made contact with each one of the people that represented each one of those groups, the deal couldn't progress past a certain stage. That's one of the biggest differences between when you're in sort of this mid-market motion and you move up market, because you're in a world where you're no longer selling to one person, you're selling to a group of people. And each one of those people has different sets of needs, challenges, wants, and each one of them is involved in the buying decision in some way, shape, or form. And what you need to recognize, and I think this is the part where when I would transition mid-market reps up market, they would always be like, well, Sam said that they were good to go, so we're good to go. I heard my yes. And we're done. Not recognizing that Sam's only role in the conversation was to not say no. Sam didn't even have to give you an emphatic thumbs up. So you spent all of your time on the wrong person to delight and excite. What changes, and this is back to Sam's point, like this is a good lesson no matter what. Discovery never stops in the sales motion. But what you end up with is once you figure out how an organization buys, then you continue to do discovery on their buying process. So Sam, what's important to you? Oh, all right. So you're going to ask me about a security review. Well, here's our information about SOC 2, or here's our information about GDPR, because I know that's important to you. And then Doug, I know that Doug is on the marketing side, so he's going to have a different set of concerns. But you never stop discovery on what those folks' roles are in the buying process, in addition to identifying that you're not just selling to one person. And if a rep came in forecast with one deal, single threaded, like just get the F out of my forecast meeting. You're wasting my time and your time. So please don't forecast.
I think
No, go
Doug,
ahead,
you
Sam.
go. No, you go.
So there's a couple things. So basically one of the things that Richard's talking about is building consensus. You have to build consensus across the organization. You need to understand who's likely going to be involved in the buying decision, not exactly who is, because you don't know. And so when you just, the reason why people talk about trusted advisors, like the best sales reps are trusted advisors, because they act like high paid consultants, and they have a hypothesis about their business. I have a hypothesis about your business. So yeah, I might have some hunches, and I want to pressure test those hunches because, by the way, we're in this together. Like I'm not trying to sell you something that doesn't make sense for your business. That's not going to help you match that strategic initiative, i.e. growth or cost or risk, right? And so going into these conversations, you can go into every single conversations with a hypothesis, or more importantly, you need to have a point of view. And to me, this is what separates enterprise sellers, like the baller strategic enterprise sellers, with like the folks that are in mid-market trying to move up. And mid-market trying to move up, unfortunately, what you end up doing is selling use cases. Guess what? Enterprise sellers don't sell use cases. No, they talk business value. Right? And yes, ROI is a component of that, but business value is like, hey, guess what? In your industry right now, you're ranked 4th. And it seems to be that in your industry, you're declining. You've been declining over the last 5 years. How are you thinking about stopping the bleeding? I've got a hypothesis about that. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to do with our solution, but this is a business conversation. And so I'm going to build a point of view about your business and ways in which you can improve to go from 4th to 3rd to 2nd, maybe, or even just to stop the bleeding. And that's a different level conversation than, hey, here are some use cases in terms of how you can use our product to actually get value. And let me show you this little ROI calculator that we fucking built and no one believes. Excuse my French. That's very different than, oh, you want to grow, like if your strategic priority is to grow revenue and you've been growing at 40% year over year, well, okay, what do you want to go to 50? Do you want to go to 60? Do you want to go to 70? Where is this coming from? What does that look like? What do you think you need to do differently in order to actually continue to increase? Like there are a lot of different components that you need to be more thoughtful of, and you need to be more business oriented versus product and feature oriented.
Well, and I think about this. So the question then is, okay, like that's great. And we get that, we have to do that, but how do we do it? How do we multi-thread? How do we actually get other people to show up without making our, initial champion feel like we're trying to get around them? So I think a couple things. One of the mantras I always talk about is after you have your initial call, your discovery call, the first call with whoever line of business inside the company, whatever you're talking to, think about when you're ending that call and transitioning to the second one, you're trying to double the quantity or double the quality of all of the people of the next call, whoever attends. And I say that because oftentimes we talk to one person, right? And we're all excited and we're like, Doug, thanks for taking my call. And maybe like when you're talking to Doug, like Doug's it, like you can just keep, unless, Doug gets hit by a truck and then you're not multi-threaded and then what have you done? But if I talk to Doug, I want to know like who else at MCAP should I be talking to? Who else can I loop into the conversation? Who at Doug's portfolio company can I get in, right? Because if I can't double the quantity and get another Doug, or double the quality, right, and get another Doug plus another Doug, whatever, then I'm not scaling my time effectively, right? Because I'm spending an hour of my time talking to the same single person, which is again great because it's Doug, but let's expand on there. The other thing I think, back exactly to what Doug said about we're all in this together, right? Which I know is like one of our dreaded phrases now because of COVID, like we're all in this together. Yeah, okay. But we really are. So think about this conversation, right? When you have the conversation with your prospects and you change the perspective. And again, it's a conversation. This isn't a sales pitch, but when you have the conversation to say, you and I are a team. So you and I at our same level or one level up, we're working together to bring this solution that we both basically agreed that you guys need into your organization. So when you start to talk and use that kind of language, instead of like, how can I, get this to you and who should I meet with, just say like, hey, we're a team. How are we going to get this done together? You're really changing that conversation, getting that person to open up to say, I need my bosses to be on this call. So I'm going to invite them and you invite your bosses, and then we'll all do some executive matching and move forward. And then you're multi-threaded, not only in that organization, but in parallel with your organization too.
One thing that's really helpful in that, and just kind of going back to what Doug and Sam were saying about building consensus and having some confidence and having perspective, that goes a couple different ways. Doug was talking about having some domain knowledge and understanding of your business. I know that you're number 3 and I want you want to be number 2. The other thing that's helpful too, and you see this more when you're dealing with somebody who's maybe new to a bigger organization, but maybe promoted into a senior role, you're actually better at selling than they are at buying, hands down.
Totally.
You've gone through and you know a ton about your product and you know a ton about how organizations like them buy. So to Sam's point, you can actually take that one level further. Hey, Doug, typically for our next call, and this is basic blocking and tackling in sales, but it's doubly important in the enterprise because there's so many people involved. Doug, usually when we talk to folks at venture capital firms, we typically involve, once we're talking to someone like you, we typically bring in somebody from the operations team. Would that be Sally or Beth or Gina from your side? Because they're going to want to know how we deploy. And that's going to come up. And then Doug goes like, oh, wow. Oh yeah, shoot. That's right. We are going to have to deploy the same. This guy, Richard, really knows what he's talking about. So it's another way for you to show not only domain and subject mastery, but also just like, I'm going to make your job easier, Sam. Yep. I'm going to make it easier for you to buy this thing. And I'm going to make you look like a rock star. You're going to be promoted next year when you invest with us.
Yeah. You're talking about, Richard, you're talking about teaching our customers how to buy. And that is a really important step to transitioning into actually doing more sophisticated deals, because the reality is we make a ton of assumptions that actually the buyers, i.e. me, when I was actually buying software for Salesforce or Box, that we actually know what the fuck we're doing. Half the time we don't. And by the way, I have to turn around and sell this internally when you walk away. And you know what? I'm using my own language. So thank you so much for, this great presentation, but I can't deliver it the same way that you can. And here's when it comes to multi-threading, I want us to do one thing. Get rid of the word champion. I hate the word champion because a champion is actually not willing to take a risk to actually put their neck on the line for you, because the reality is they don't have enough authority or clout to get all the people together. So who you really need is a mobilizer. Mobilizer is actually the person that actually has access to everyone. They have enough authority and enough clout. If they pull together a meeting, including with people from the C-suite, they're going to show up. Now, the reason why they won't do it is because of their risk quotient, if you will. Like, how much is this putting me out on the line? Have I done this before and has it backfired on me? I'm like, or what is this going to do for me? If I'm on my way out, I don't really give a shit. Right. But if I want to continue to build my brand in the organization, then I'm willing to take the risk, but let's have that honest conversation. Call them out. Be like, listen, I recognize the fact, to Sam's point, to have a meeting with these people involved in this meeting, you're putting your neck on the line. What does that mean to you? Like, what happens if this goes wrong? What happens if they all get pissed because you wasted their time? Are you worried about losing your job? Because if you're not having that conversation, then you're not helping them think through the good and the bad for just pulling together this meeting. And that's what building consensus is, actually people willing to take the risk to do that. Because I can tell you, when I was at Box, I made some significant purchase decisions that failed miserably twice. And as a result, I never would do it again. Someone was telling me, like, this is awesome. I don't want to get involved. I'm the person, by the way, that's going to hold it out, and I own it, but I don't want to get involved. I'm not doing it.
I think it's such an important thing to keep in mind, though, the teaching them how to buy, because I think, especially, think about if you have multiple lines of business in your company. So depending on the size of whoever you work for, if you have multiple lines of business, you probably have already gone through the buying process with that company in another line of business if they buy from you. So you have lessons to learn there. But even just think about what are the questions that are normally asked, right, of your company, right? InfoSec documents, terms and conditions to be redlined, right? All that stuff. You have to be the ones to ask that, because again, teaching them how to buy, they may have never purchased anything like this before. They may have never purchased anything in their life. This might be the very first time that they're going through this process, or it might be the first time that they're buying something like you, right? We think about how many new technologies come up every day from, all our SaaS models and machine learnings and all sorts of things now. This might be the very first time that they're going through that with you. So it is important that you have these questions prepared, and they're totally fair and non-salesy to ask. You just need to know what they are. And if you're a sales leader and your teams don't have that, sure as hell make sure that they do.
Well, and also the bigger the deal, the more it's at stake for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so while they may have bought little things, but now they're talking about spending millions. Oh boy, now there's way more, on the line here for this deal.
Totally.
Well, and there's a psychological impact of making an investment like that as well, because I mean, maybe Doug has, but most of us haven't spent millions of dollars on stuff in our lives. So there's also, you have to recognize you've got people on the other end of the call who are thinking about something like, this is maybe more money than I've ever had in my hands at one point in time, and I'm going to invest it in Doug and Doug's company, because I think they're going to help us go from number 3 in the industry to number 1. Like, ooh, that feels like a really big risk, and it's uncomfortable. And that's okay, all right? It should be uncomfortable, but you should make them and you should tuck them into bed at night with, to Sam's point, providing all of that material. Here's our InfoSec doc. Here's our standard T's and C's. I know you're in the, Doug, you're in the quick service industry. So typically they want to see this type of privacy document. Go ahead and forward that along to your security team. I'm going to put you in a position to be A-okay with this.
Yeah. I like, by the way, the language that you're using, the typically, right? So there's, you know, when in the world of enterprise selling, you actually have to be more mindful and more thoughtful about the words that you use. Linguistics matters. Typically, you might, like, I'm not gonna tell Sam what she has to do. No, I say you might be thinking X. Well, okay, right? You know, so like words really, really matter. And because there's a certain level of professionalism that is expected. By the way, you know, if we're now doing a multi-million-dollar deal that's going to try and help us take us from number 3 to number 2, they're like CEOs likely involved, CFOs likely involved, CXOs involved. So guess what? You're going to have to get your broader team involved in the conversation. And so to Sam's point, get everybody internally prepared for that.
Yeah. Think about this too on the multi-threading angle, what this can do for you if any of those people leave, right? So you've taken this ability, right, to sell them on this and get them involved. So 1, what if they leave? Great that you're multi-threaded. 2, if they leave, where did they go? And do they need you? And is it in your territory? And jump on it, right? Like, I mean, what an awesome opportunity to expand from there. So even more important, like you're just basically funneling leads. And again, more people for you to connect with on LinkedIn, keep up with where they're going, and then continue to sell them. Linguistics, just on that note too, again, it's so important because what you're basically doing is making them feel like they're just like everybody else that you've already gone through this process with, right? They're not telling you you're not telling them how it is. You're saying like, here's my experience. Is it the same for you? Do you think that this is the same experience on your side, or what's required on your side? And they're going to say, oh, I have no idea. And you're gonna be like, fascinating. Go find out. Oh my God. That's it.
There's a good question. There's a good question that came in here from Ron that I want to hit on here. And Ron was just asking, you know, how do you ask them about their confidence as a buyer, right? When was the last time you bought something like this? And what we actually used to do, and this was, and any of the AEs who's ever worked with me will have this imprinted on the back of their eyelids. Anytime Sam said, no, I'm going to go take that to Doug. You don't need to talk to Doug. Hey, Sam, what's your batting average with things like this with Doug? Does every time you give something to Doug, he just approves it? It's like a rubber stamp, or is this like a 50-50 shot? Like, what are we talking about there? Back to that discovery, right? You never stop discovery on how they buy. Yeah. So to Ron's question, the way we would always ask that, once we got to a certain point when we were going to bring in, maybe there's somebody in the 3rd tier that we weren't talking to. What's your batting average with that person? Who else is involved? How often do you make recommendations? How successful do they get through? And you can do this so many different ways.
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit. Not that I think you're wrong. I just think there's another tier above that, which is if you're selling multi-million-dollar deals to a C-suite, like this is like the SAPs of the world and the Oracles of the world. This is, in my mind, like the big baller enterprise selling. Guess what? They've already bought shit like this before. So like, have you ever bought something like this before? Fuck, come on. They totally have. Just do your research and try and understand what technology are they using. If they're using Salesforce, SAP, their AWS, Azure, their global organization, fuck yeah, they bought something like this before. Now, the person that you're speaking to may not have been involved in that process. And that's what I want to better understand. But they absolutely have bought something like this before. So I want to understand, you know, when you guys bought SAP 20 years ago, old school, whatever it may be, like, what was that like? Like, walk me through that, because what I'm finding in today's environment is actually the process has changed quite dramatically, but it may not have changed for you. So like, just be mindful of like who you're selling into. Right. The likelihood is, if it's a bigger company, the likelihood that they bought something like this is pretty high. So now what I want to understand is like, okay, what do you ultimately really care about? Again, going back up to that point of view, what's your financial case for change? What's motivating the entire organization to get behind something like this? Now, we're also talking, these are multi-million dollar deals. If we're talking like $1 million deal, which is not insignificant, then yes, you may be in that situation where, have you ever bought anything this significant before in the organization? So just again, one of the things in the world of enterprise is prioritizing your list of accounts that you have and trying to identify where do you spend your time. That is so much work, and it's important to do that up front so you understand like what their buying cycles are. Just so you guys know, in the Fortune 2000, probably the Fortune 5000, maybe even the Fortune 10,000, they have buying windows when they make significant buying decisions. That's it. We buy between July and October, period. So guess what? If you know that and it's January, well, I'm not going to put them on my high priority list right now. I may put them on my nurture list, but they're not going to be one that I'm actually trying to really push for right now because we're still in Q1, right? Or maybe the fact that like the window's closing and so I don't maybe have a whole lot of time. So I'm going to push them to next year and continue to work and nurture this account because this is going to be a long-term relationship. Enterprise selling is long-term relationships. It's not one and done. Now, always take the deal off the table if there's a deal on the table that you can. Don't wait, a year or 2 years because to Sam's point, some people may leave and things change. But it's a long-term relationship. In the world of enterprise selling, you'll always find there are people who like, you get invited to their weddings, like your kids hang out with each other because guess what? We've been working on this thing for like a year, 2 years, 3 years together. And oh, by the way, now that it's been implemented, we're now focusing on, further rollouts or going deeper in the organization. So we're buddies for a long time. That's to me, some of the core differences between like real enterprise selling and like mid-market selling.
Let's be super clear about something that Doug said though, because I think this is also a misconception in enterprise sales. So if their buying window is from July to October and it's January and you're thinking like, I'm going to wait till July, I'm going to wait till June 30th and reach out to them. Yeah. Holy moly, right? You're going to do it absolutely wrong.
I definitely was not saying that.
Right. Just to be clear, because I imagine people are like, okay, good, July, great. Wrote it down. I was talking to an SVP of sales the other day. We teed up a monster opportunity for him. And he's like, well, there's nothing until February of next year, so we'll reach out then. And I'm like, just thinking that this is probably what he's also teaching his reps to do. Right. So that nurture game is, again, I think a game-changing aspect of being an enterprise rep. Like, what is your nurture game? When you hear, even let's just start simple. If you hear someone say, hey, they respond to your outbound campaign and they're like, we would love to talk to you. I cannot prioritize this for 90 days, but reach out to me then and I'll talk to you. What do? Yep. The reps that are great will be like, you got it. And they have a cadence of value that they are going to drive to you for the next 90 days. LinkedIn, emails, webinar invites, whatever the hell, because what they want you to do is just be thinking about them all day, every day. They're not going to wait for that 90 days. And you know who's going to win the deal? It's going to be them. It's not going to be the guy or girl who waited for, 89 days to reach out. You've got to build a cadence of evergreen content that you can start to send out and just automate. Use outreach, use SalesLoft, I'll go with SalesLoft since they're our sponsor for today. Use SalesLoft and get that stuff out, right? Because if you're not, you're going to miss the boat.
So Sam, you're telling me I can't say just checking in on the 90th day. That's not going to work for me. Are you sure?
I'll borrow Doug's word of fuck for that.
But actually, what Sam's saying, like the world of enterprise sales means you have to have a plan. Yep. And not just an account plan. Like, what do we know? Where's the white space? Like, no, what is my plan of attack for this account? So in order to have a plan, you have to have a ton of information about the industry, about the business. By the way, like in Sam's case, like I got 90 days, cool. I'm going to read about what's going on in the industry. And if I find something interesting, I'm going to send that to them. Like, wow, I didn't realize that this new policy change that's happening in the world of oil and gas could potentially actually impact your ability to double growth for next year. Right. Really curious how you're thinking about that. I don't need to have a meeting. I'm just sharing information with you to help to help you better understand that I'm thinking about you and I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, i.e. empathy, i.e. enterprise selling.
That's it. So I think that most important thing is you don't ask for anything during this nurture process. They know what you want. You don't need to be like, would you like to talk for 15 or 20? No, I don't want to talk to you. I said 90 days. Get out of my face. It is all about value, right? I want to touch on one really interesting question that I see pop up in the Q&A, and I think this is probably going to transition us to talking about hiring. But before I answer it, I'm super curious on your guys' position. So in your opinion, does becoming a great enterprise seller require years of experience and industry or domain experience? I have a very strong opinion about this, but I'll defer to you guys first.
Richard? I'm gonna noodle.
Well, first, it depends. It depends.
Waffling.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm not gonna say it depends, by the way. I got an answer.
I think that it does. It requires a certain level of discipline that comes from being a business professional for a long period of time. It requires a certain level of tenacity and emotional management that I think is hard to find. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's exceptionally rare to find in folks that don't have a decent book of business experience. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I agree.
Doug?
I mean, here's the thing. Like, the reason why you hire enterprise sellers that have experience is because they understand that enterprise selling is complex, and you need to know how to multi-thread, you know how to deal with mobilizers, you know how to deal with legal, you know how to ask legal, or ask somebody the question of, like, when is legal actually turned down a deal? Thank you, David Fox, for that comment. Like, you understand the process. By the way, you also have an understanding of how to have a real business conversation and how to assess a business to see if it makes sense for us to even have a conversation. Like, if you see that the business has been leaking cash and they've been going from number 2 and they're down to number 6, and your solution is going to help them, but you're hyper focused on revenue growth, it may not be a good conversation. It may not be a good fit for you. So, like, great, guess what? On my list of accounts, they're going down to the bottom. That just takes time and experience. And so, to an earlier question, can this be taught? Are you born with it? I mean, it's 100% taught, and it's also experience. But that's also why we need to go out and hire folks that have done it before. It doesn't mean you can't take somebody that's in mid-market and help them move up. I'm definitely not saying that. But just know that there's differences in terms of what is required of you once you move up into enterprise.
Yeah, I think the industry experience is interesting, just to think about it more in silos of, are you selling sales tech stack? Are you selling marketing tech stack? What is it that you're selling specifically? I think hiring someone who has an understanding of that, right? So what is a sales leader going to look for when you're selling this technology, or marketing leader?
Right.
How are they paid, incentivized, all that stuff? Why will your technology make a difference? I think that's important. What I think is less so important is, one, having sold this exact technology before, right? So totally. all the time, well, have you sold CRM before? No. I think the other thing that's interesting is, I don't always look for an unbelievable amount of enterprise experience before hiring somebody. So I think we make a lot of poor decisions in saying must have at least 10 years of enterprise experience. Like, all right, well, great. I mean, unequivocally the most successful salesperson I've ever hired in my career directly had, I think, maybe 2, maybe 3 years of sales, not enterprise, sales experience under her belt. But she crushed it and continues to crush it every day because she's really scrappy. She's a hustler. She thinks all the time, what next, right? She's really, really smart. So don't undervalue how that intelligence really can bring something to the table, how quick somebody can learn, how they can latch onto those things. Because I think sometimes we just look for the boxes, check this and that, and if you don't, then we dismiss you.
And as Mark Roberts always said, his number one factor for actually hiring a salesperson is their coachability for him. Yeah, right? So coachability. You could take somebody like that who's a hustler and who's hungry and has a willingness to learn and will absorb all of the insights from their peers. It certainly is an important factor.
I always say it in a ruder way. Do they have a brain or not? That's what I look for.
What I was going to say to kind of build off of both of those, and I love the Robert's point, but Sam, it comes back to being honest with yourself, and you have to be damn honest with yourself as a leader. Does this person, because I can take on a hustler if I know I can teach somebody discipline, project management, task orientation, time horizon. Like, if I don't know how to coach that is a big risk taking on that hustler, because that's just an unfocused, like, that's completely left lane. Like, they're just zooming by cars. Yeah. Whereas if I've got the experience training that person up to have those skills, it becomes a little bit less of a risk. And then, you're not in a world where you have to deprogram 10 years of SAP or Oracle selling bad habits to get them to sell at your stage, which is a point that neither of you hit on, right? There is be honest about where your business is. I've seen that before. Oh, we're going to hire this gal and she's got 15 years experience in the Rolodex, and you're like a Series B company. Yeah. And then she comes in and she's like, well, hold on, where's my product marketing support?
Oh gosh.
Where's my deal strategist? Why is my SE not on every call all the time? And it's just like, you're going to have a bad time at that startup.
Yeah, totally.
So that's another important part. Be self-aware about who you're hiring and what stage you're at. Even if you are in the enterprise, be honest about what you have for support for that person.
Yeah, for sure.
So conversely, the worst hire I ever made in my life came from, this is coming to a very established organization that had process and everything already mapped out, and hiring a person who had been in nonstop startup world, 10, 13 years of startup land, right? And so what you've got then, right, where you might think like, oh, well, then they're going to walk in and be like, wow, I have a deal strategist, I have an SC, I have marketing materials, that's amazing. What you're going to lack in that person is an understanding of how to drive a deal in a set of 40 enterprise accounts that they have, right? Because they're coming from a world where the world was their territory. And now we're saying, nope, you've got 40 accounts, you've got to drive value there, you've got to open those up, go figure it out. And that person probably has an inability to do that. So it's really important that you ask the right questions to understand what are their skill sets and what are their expectations coming in.
Yeah, I will say in the world of enterprise, one of the things that I look for outside of coachability, and there's a question as to, I can tell you how to test for coachability, but there's a certain level of professionalism that I look for. So I actually want to test your writing skills, because you're going to be writing some very, very senior people. And this bullshit that you use is just like free form text writing that you also use in your Snapchat channels. Like that's just not going to fly. I'm sorry, it's just not going to fly when you're reaching out to a VP at a Fortune 5,000 company. It's just not going to work. So you need to be really thoughtful about how you communicate and articulate, how you actually write, how you prepare, like all this. It's a certain level of professionalism that I'm looking for. How polished are you? And just in how you communicate. And so I'm going to test for that. But in terms of coachability too, I'm going to give you a pitch deck. Like, go learn this and come pitch to me. And then I'm going to give you feedback, live feedback. And then I'm going to have you do it again. And I want to know how much you've changed. The likelihood that the second presentation that you deliver, it should be way worse than the first one, because the first one you practice, right? And so you kind of nailed it. And then I tell you, here are all the things that I'd like to see differently. And then you go in, and if you didn't pay attention to what I was recommending and you go back to the one that you did, then you're not that coachable in my mind, right? So there are exercises that you can do to test, like, I'm sharing some feedback with you. What are you doing with that feedback? Yeah. I want to know, are you actually listening, absorbing it, and trying to reapply it? Or are you just kind of beelining, to Richard's point, I'm just gonna plow right through and I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing.
Can you guys imagine?
That's my pressure test.
Can you imagine pitching to Doug? I'm already nervous. Like, my hands are sweating just even thinking about it. I again, totally agree with you. I'm just going to be your lackey to just like promote all of your points here, Doug. But the coachability is huge. So we once had a situation where we had a rep that was interviewing for the next level roll up, and he went and did his entire interview. And at the end, all of us as leaders gave him feedback. And one of the pieces of feedback he got was, this wasn't the right way to do this. Like, you steamrolled me and you didn't even ask me any questions. And he's like, that's worked for me my entire career. So thanks. And then was shocked. Bye. And then was shocked about not getting the next role, right? So coachability, right? Let's just think about this from your own perspective. Even you guys in the leadership position, you roll up to someone, right? At some level, we roll up to somebody. So think about this. It is just the idea of being open to the idea that your way is not the only way. And it's quite possibly not the right way either. So just think about it. And if you get feedback that you don't quite agree with, make sure you have mentors in your life, in and outside of your organization, where you can say, this is a situation, this is how I reacted, this is the feedback I got, what do you think, right? Especially outside of your organization, you're going to get feedback where they're going to say, that's BS. We can say shit, right? It's bullshit, or that's spot on, and this is something you really have to adjust in yourself.
Yep. Can I make a little comment there? By the way, everybody on this call, and even if you're listening to the recording, just ask for more feedback from your peers and from your bosses. And by the way, bosses, learn how to give fucking feedback, please. Because most people like criticism isn't feedback. But a great feedback model that I learned a long time ago is what I noticed, the impact that it had, and how about doing X. Right? So what I noticed, here's what I noticed. And by the way, I can just be an observer. Like, what I noticed was, Sam, that comment was actually it opened up the discussion and the conversation. And the impact was, I found like actually more people in the room were talking than I ever thought possible. But how about you keep doing that? In fact, how about you teach the rest of the team how to do that? Because that's a really important skill. That's some positive feedback.
For everybody that's listening to this and has thought, I never like to give feedback because it is so horribly uncomfortable, there's your framework, right? So feedback is great when you ask questions like, how did you think the meeting went? What do you think people thought of your presentation? Like, what's your perception of how things went? Like, that's a great way to crack it open. But Doug just gave you a framework of like, here's what I noticed, here's the impact, right? And just fall in line with that. It's just a great crutch to have, especially if you're nervous about feedback. The other thing that I think is
because you don't want people to take it personally.
Right.
Take it personally. It's like, if you're like, well, you know, what could you have done better? And I'm basically trying to guide you to say, like, ask more questions. And they're like, oh shit, I suck at asking questions. Like, also take it personally. And it's like, you want to talk about the impact that it had on the situation or other people. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Sam, but.
No, just, you know, feel free to interrupt anytime. Just kidding.
Interrupt. Oh.
Wow. Sam, can you mansplain to us what manterrupt means, please?
To the heart.
Okay. Listen to also what Doug said. I don't think this is as visible, but the difference between great and not great feedback is specificity, right? So if Doug's like, hey, that meeting was really great, peace out. And you're like, wait, well, what about it was great? Yeah, exactly. Like, define that. Like, this was great. I love how you did this. I love how you did that. I love how you did this. Like, this is the impact that I saw from the client because you did this. Or if it's not great, like, I think that meeting could have not gone better. One, like, you could have, come with like a proper dress on or pants on or whatever. What's happened plenty of times where we showed up and people are poorly dressed and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to handle this? Right? But the feedback has to be specific. So if you're not specific and you're just using superlatives, you're missing out.
Yeah.
And I think on that, it is a discipline, it is a skill as a manager that you have to create an environment where it's perpetual. It's not just at your annual review or, we're negotiating for more comp or whatever it is. It should just be something that's part and parcel of how you execute and run your team. Totally. And I think, Sam, what you said there was pretty interesting around like, hey, it's got to be specific. Oftentimes what folks forget is we've all got different definitions of what things mean. So being very explicit, like we were at the start of this conversation, what does enterprise sales mean, right? Being very specific around whether it's communication style, whether it's the way that you carry yourself. And in most instances, if you're hiring experienced people, you don't need to be like, hey, don't show up to the closing meeting wearing yoga pants or, athletic shorts or whatever it might be, back to the dressing appropriately.
Doug.
Well, by the way, now they can because, it's all about, party on the bottom, professional up top, but.
But it's an important part as your organization. It also makes it clear back to the hiring point. Like if you're upfront about who you are and you have a clear understanding of how you operate, it does actually make it easier for folks to self-select in and out, which saves you time in the hiring process, which again, it's all about time management here.
Yeah. I know we're going to be wrapping here in a minute, and I know people are going to have to go, but I have to share one tool, because the question came up, like, what tools would you use? The single best tool in the world of enterprise right now that I've seen, and I wish I had this 20 years ago, is a company called Databook. Check it out. It's called trydatabook.com. We're not investors. I'm just friends with the founders. I'm friends of theirs largely because I saw what they've created. And I was like, holy shit, where was this when I was in enterprise sales? Because what they've done is basically, well, I'm not even going to explain it. Just go check it out. It's mind-boggling how much work they have done for you to help you prioritize your accounts, build out your point of view, identify the financial case for change, identify who's involved in the buying decision, what their buying window is. And this is for all major publicly traded enterprise companies. It's ridiculous.
Databook, you said
that you mentioned.
Trydatabook.com. Yeah, that was a little commercial for those guys, but
mention Doug Dennis when you reach out to them.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, you should. They'll take really good care of you.
It's such a bummer, but it's time to wrap up.
I know.
I love this conversation. I know that everyone watching did too. We want to give you guys back a minute so that you can prepare for your next meeting. But before we go, if each of our speakers can just do a tweet length, like key takeaway, the thing that our audience needs to remember and maybe that they can do today to understand enterprise selling. And let's start with Doug, and then we'll go Sam and Rich.
Well, I mean, I just did my commercial for Databook. To me, that's like a game changer. But the one big takeaway for me on this call was like, watch out for your manterrupting. Boom.
I'm never going to live that down. I'm going to be on my deathbed and you're going to be there. Remember that time
so
you said this?
I know, I'm taking it to heart. I appreciate it. I really do.
Totally
As I just did it again.
I think my takeaway is for you guys is to make sure that you really have your processes separated out for enterprise, from selling, expectations, how you're going to market, how you hire. If you just think it's bigger and longer as a sales process, it's not. If you have absolutely no clue how to do it, there are tons of people out there, myself included, who can help consult you through this. And then just back to Doug's excellent point, right? Again, basics of selling, but monetize the pain. You have got to figure out why the hell they're even making a choice to listen to you, talk to you, and what financial impact this is going to make. Because nothing else will get the deal over the line. Certainly not like, oh, 10% off because it's end of quarter, which it is. So that's my takeaway for you guys.
Yeah. Wow, it's tough to follow up. My one piece of advice on this would just be stay disciplined. Don't fall in love with logos. Don't trust anything and be suspicious constantly, and then put mitigations in place for that. Like we were talking about with forecasting. Why won't the deal close? What are we doing about that? Why won't the deal close? What are we doing about that? It's good to have in forecasting anyways, but it's like triply important in the enterprise.
Get paranoid.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Super appreciate your time and your knowledge given to the MSP community. If you guys loved this, I'm going to send you the recording tomorrow morning. Please share it out because I think other people need to hear this. And thanks again to SalesLoft for sponsoring this event. But thank you so much, and we'll see you guys soon.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Sam and Doug.
Bye, guys.